So I heard that you have claimed to get a 100% score on your Revit test, but no one has the proof to back it up.
This is true, yes.
Are you secretly a Revit genius, or is there a conspiracy behind your perfect score?
I don't know. I think there might be a conspiracy. You never know. But conspiracies are based in truth, right? So my previous life, I came from BIM consulting. Okay. So I did a lot of BIM consulting for smaller architecture firms too. And so, that history of being in a firm that did Revit consulting, BIM consulting, I had a lot of background in Revit.
Okay.
And so, when I did my Revit test at Ricca, it was documented at the time. The documents of the test results are now gone.
Mysteriously lost.
But, my claim is that, I did get 100%.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. Could you share a pivotal moment in your career where technology significantly impacted your design approach?
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned this just a few minutes ago too, but basically my previous world of, I was in an architecture firm for many years, and then I transitioned out of that into BIM consulting. And so that was about at the time that everything with BIM really took off. Now, architecture firms have been in Revit and in 3D rendering for, decades.
And as someone
forever.
who's not as familiar with this world, it was AutoCAD before Revit that was most widely used?
Most widely used, yes.
Okay.
Yep. So hand drafting, of course, way back when, that was the most popular method. And then, AutoCAD came on board. People really embraced that technology. And it just made their lives easier. Right. So, you could do, 200 drawings in one computer versus rooms of, draftsmen drawing things.
Gotcha.
So over the years, it just progresses to, so hand drawing, AutoCAD, and then now Revit. And Revit came on board, I think it might have been about 15, 20 years ago when Revit first got introduced. People were a little wary of it, but everybody's always been using software like SketchUp, other 3D modeling software. The animation industry has been in it forever.
Yeah.
And so the architecture industry, we finally got into it. Revit was really interesting because it had components of it that helped make our lives easier.
Okay.
So, as an example, when you draw an oven, you would draw line work to draw an oven, or a wall, you would just draw lines to make a wall. But now with Revit in that 3D world, you would draw a wall, it would have inherent, we call it building information in it, like the BI of the BIM.
The BI, got it.
And so you can do so much more with 3D stuff. And then now, lately, COVID sort of forced a lot of people's hands, to be honest. But I feel like it was a thing in history that really is a benefit. So basically, it forced everybody to go to the cloud. So now we're hosting models on the cloud, and people are interacting and, sharing live models back and forth on the cloud. People were sort of doing it back then, maybe 10 years ago. But really, COVID really stepped everybody up to be like, we should embrace this. It makes our life easier.
Wow.
And so now, the technology makes collaborating with architects on that, we do day to day. It makes our job easier. We can work with an architecture firm in LA and we're in Denver, and then have the engineer in New York. That's just a crazy example, right? So it allows to break down the virtual walls of, limitations of work across borders, basically.
Wow, and how has that impacted your design approach?
Because we've been doing it for so long, it really hasn't impacted it, I would say. So
it's kind of ingrained when you were learning.
Yeah, yeah. So like I said, people in the industry have been doing this stuff for years, literally years. And so I think nowadays people just, especially kids coming out of school now, they just know that that's the world everybody's in.
Gotcha.
Right? So they're learning, Revit in school in some university settings, or going to learn, Revit on a smaller college level. But basically it doesn't really change what we do anymore, right? So we've adapted, especially Ricca has as well. We embraced Revit years and years and years ago, just because we saw our architecture partners, our engineering partners, and them also embracing it. And we're we don't want to be left behind. We want to be on the forefront. We want to keep up with them. And, us being in Revit makes their life easier. They don't have to import a CAD, export a CAD to us, back and forth, right?
Gotcha.
So it just makes our life easier. And honestly, it's just kind of normal for us now.
As the tech world likes to say, a little more seamless.
Yeah, super seamless. Very
awesome.
seamless, yeah.
And I think we went into this a little bit, but how has your background in architecture influenced your perspective on integrating technology into design?
Sure. So, even back when I graduated, I'm not going to date myself, but it was many years ago. Back even then, even most architecture firms were 100% Revit, right? And so, being in a firm, I was in large and small firms. We worked in Revit, and basically having that background of understanding how an architecture firm works, how they build their Revit models, how they manage the files and the distribution of that all kind of translated to my BIM consulting world,
Yeah.
right? So, I helped smaller architecture firms take on, the same efficiencies that a large firm with a lot of resources had,
Oh, yeah.
implement it on a small scale, and then bring that to Ricca. Ricca was already doing that before I came here. I just kind of helped push everybody a little bit faster in the future. Really make sure that we're streamlining processes, sharing models, doing the most up-to-date modeling techniques, things like that.
I think having that architecture perspective, I think it's probably really helped your work at Ricca and
Super helpful.
understanding what the architect wants to receive.
Oh, 100%.
And what is there anything on your day-to-day work that you're like, hey, I should include that or exclude that based upon your architecture experience?
Definitely. Now, again, most everything that we do in Revit is in 3D, right? And architects are looking more and more to showcase a rendering or what's happening in 3D in scope areas that we have earlier on in the process. So being able to get into Revit sooner rather than later is super helpful. It just helps, either the architect or the end user and client visualize what's happening in a kitchen in 3D.
Yes.
Instead of most everybody kind of usually circulates plans and diagrams that are very flat in 2D. A lot of people can't visualize what that looks like in 3D or in the real world, right? So being able to get things into 3D so an architect can render out a rendering that shows a kitchen accurately is a super helpful thing.
I will say, even from my perspective, looking at plans, I have a hard time imagining. So I can imagine from the owners and the client's perspective that being able to see that 3D has really changed the game on, the end goal efficiencies, but then maybe what the operator wants as well.
100%. Yep.
How do you balance the use of technology with traditional design principles in your projects?
Right. So everybody has a different viewpoint. Whether you talk to someone who sells TVs or like Google or an architect or, a coder, what have you. We've been in a design industry for a long time. And so, we're in the business of communicating a design and making sure that that's right, but also listening to our end users, the operators, the clients, and everything like that. So technology in our industry, I typically see it as a tool. It is not the only thing that we have at our disposal to use, right? So just like, a handyman has a toolbox, we have a toolbox as well. So, it's a balance between, here, I'm going to do a 2D sketch, whether it's in hand form or digital form. I need to sketch out a design, space program, some blocks for a plan. That never goes away.
Yeah.
So we still do a lot of that early on, schematic design, sketching, and understanding, here's the space planning. And that's very fluffy, right? It adjusts a lot. This space needs to get bigger, this space needs to get smaller. You can do that really quickly on the fly with 2D and hand sketches. So I don't think that will ever go away, things like that. And then, once you get past schematic design, as you're starting to create physical documents of your design, that's when the technology really starts to come into play, right? You're doing things in 3D, you're trying to convey the design. It's a toolbox to get you to the end goal. Later on in the design, we lean on it heavier as we're documenting things. We're creating MEP drawings, elevations, things like that. So you lean on it a little heavier later in the design, but it doesn't mean that you're also still not visiting a site. As great as BIM is and clash detection in the cloud, things like that, you still need to walk a site too.
Yeah.
Right? So I need to go make sure that all my utilities are in the right location, roughed into the rough heights. Things like that. So that tactile, hands-on experience, I think, has to go hand in hand with technology. Nowadays, you can't have one without the other, but I think embracing both and still having both is important.
as you said, I think we're in the business of communication and communicating designs. And I don't think, I mean, at least not now, technology isn't to the place where you can replace a human interaction.
Oh, no, for sure.
And going back to your comment on the schematic designs,
Right.
being able to understand what the end user needs to make it run for them as best as they can, as we can. And I think that balance of communication and being hands-on while tying that into the technology and design, I think is really great.
Yep. But being able to embrace it, right? Not being afraid of the technology is critical. So having that toolbox, not being afraid to use it when you need to, but also not being able to be afraid to use some of your older tools too.
Gotcha.
So.
Have you ever pulled out a hand drawing?
Oh yeah, many times.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes it's easier to sketch something, and that can be either an overall plan in a program, or if I'm trying to convey a design of, say, like a stainless steel work table, and just somebody's not quite yet getting the design, I can do a quick sketch. People call them napkin sketches, whatever they are, right? Sketch that shows a section of like a work table, and then someone can really immediately grab onto what I'm trying to talk about.
Awesome.
So.
Given the rapid advancements in technology, I think we see it every single day. I think something new is coming out every single day.
Yep.
How do you stay updated with the latest tools and software and design?
So for me, again, a lot of the architectural construction industry software, we're in it day to day. So we see improvements, enhancements, updates, things like that to the software we use all the time.
Gotcha.
Right. So all the software we're in, whether it's Bluebeam, Revit, Procore, whatever you're using, we are in it every day. So we see the improvements when like the next version comes out. So that's like really easy to identify. Ooh, look at this new tool. This came out. This can help my life in this way, blah, 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 blah. So that's really easy to identify for software that we already use. As far as like finding what's next and out there, in today's world with everything that's going on, kind of one of the biggest topics I think around the world is AI. So AI is a crazy key term that has dropped, whether it's in politics, our industry, in the construction industry, technology, cars, whatever, right? AI is here. Everybody's kind of dealing with it. I would say for us, we're embracing AI, but I would say the trust quite yet isn't there.
Yeah,
right?
I'd agree with that.
So for AI in the construction and design industry, especially with, a lot of what we see online, kind of, it's 50-50, but, with AI creating images, using influence to design an image that looks like one thing or another. I think we're still not yet quite at the point where AI is fully doing design.
Yeah.
Or they're doing layout or things like that, right? They're really good at evaluating something and saying like, hey, maybe, here's the program for this space that we designed a few years ago. Check that with what we are doing now. Do we see any trends that have happened in food service that might apply to why this program might not fit, right?
Yep.
So AI is really good about doing, running research, applying a lot of metrics to say something. But I don't yet quite think they're at the point where they're saying, yes, I need this range here, I need this oven here because I'm creating this cuisine.
Do you ever think, and this is kind of going into my next question, but do you ever think AI will be able to take away that communication aspect that we pride ourselves so much on, that human experience aspect? Do you think we'll ever be able to get there with AI and design?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know if I have a solid
Conjecture.
answer. It's a conjecture, yeah. I don't know if I have a solid answer for that. If you asked anybody in their industry if they think that AI is going to come and, everybody's, throwing out key phrases like, come take my jobs and AI is going to take my job and things like that. I would say no. I think there's still going to be a little bit of a human creativity, a human connection, a human communication method that you just inherently lose with AI. A lot of our clients, our end users, like I said, they've been running kitchens for years. They're used to their gas burning range that they cook on because they know it's reliable. So again, even for them to kind of switch the paradigm to say like, you're not talking to Garret, a real human, you're talking to an AI generated bot that's just communicating with you. I don't think people would embrace that.
I could see that.
specifically. So I think it same thing as what I said before. I don't think AI is here to do the design, do the communication, fully do what we do. Their AI is really great for doing repeatable tasks.
Yep,
or
simplifying mundane
exactly
stuff that takes up your time away from doing the design.
Exactly.
Can you discuss a project where the use of technology, maybe not Revit because that's so ingrained in what you do every single day, but where the use of technology significantly improved the collaboration with architects and or contractors?
Sure. So kind of going back to what I said before, I think because Ricca has been fully invested in Revit, most of our architecture partners are fully invested in Revit. Some of our GC partners are even doing clash detection in the cloud, 3D models. I don't think that there's a use of technology that makes it better, because that to me is just, that's what we do every day.
It's ingrained already.
I think if I flip that question on its head, I think when the non-use of technology is used, it actually hurts a project.
Interesting.
So I'm going to reverse that question a little bit and say that when technology isn't used of what we're very used to, you immediately notice it.
Can you give me an example of that?
Sure. So like basically if, say you have a whole design team, 12 folks, they're all using Revit, and then there is one that is not, and say maybe they are still using CAD because they haven't gotten into Revit quite yet, or they're not doing things in 3D. You immediately notice that it's not impossible, but it is a little bit more work that we have to do to help communicate to them.
Interesting.
To coordinate on, say, a drawing or something like that, right? So, it may not be live linked into our model. Same with the architecture model. So we have to do a little extra lift to communicate and coordinate things. It's not impossible, and we have a few projects that still do that. But I think for me on that question specifically, it's easier to notice when it's not being used because it kind of makes you less efficient, I would say.
Gotcha. And theoretical here, but past Revit, even because it's been so ingrained for so long and 3D modeling has been so used in the design world for so long,
Sure.
What do you think is next? What do you think's the next AutoCAD to Revit transition?
That's interesting. Revit has been around for a while. It keeps getting improved. It comes out with a new version with new,
Update.
tools and updates and things like that every year. I think for the future, something that Ricca has been exploring for a few years, we've had a couple of interactions with our clients on it. It's not super AI, but it's technology that I think can help convey a design really well, and that's VR.
Okay.
So virtual reality, I think, is the next realm of kind of the evolution of where Revit is with 3D. And again, there's other software out there that does 3D too, not just Revit.
That's just what we know.
That's just what we know. But I think VR in an interaction method with, here's my design, I can have a client or an end user physically see into a model, a digital model. They're having it in scale on a VR goggle or glasses. We've done this presentation with a couple of clients, some of our manufacturing partners. The feedback that we have gotten is that it is so helpful to understand ergonomics, space planning. Is this piece of equipment in the right place? Would I rather have it here? Again, just kind of what we were talking about before. Sometimes a plan it's too flat. Like you can't see into the design very far. Revit was the step to get things in 3D for renderings and elevations and things like that. I think the step beyond that is VR.
Now, we've talked a little bit kind of more higher level, but in what ways has technology improved the efficiency and accuracy of your design work day to day, what you're looking at, what cuts down for you, and what simplifies a task?
Sure. And using technology specifically. So, technology, like its core design is to make your life better.
Yes.
Right? It's supposed to be
Hopefully not supposed to take our jobs.
Oh, yeah, definitely not. Definitely don't want technology to take our jobs. And so the idea of technology is it's supposed to improve your life, make something easier, make your life more efficient on the day-to-day. So again, just back to our industry, we've been doing this for decades. The software's been around. Everybody's not everybody, but I would say like 99% of people have embraced technology and how it helps the construction industry.
Yes.
I think the only thing that changes a little bit too, specifically on kind of like the red tape side of things, is kind of how do we use it to manage technology in different phases of a project.
Okay.
So in a lot of BIM implementation plans, BIM contracts, and some of even our AIA contracts that we have with our clients and architecture partners, it's about determining what the level of design, and there's an acronym for it, LOD. So LOD is a BIM term, basically determining what's the level of design every phase gets towards how far we can design.
Interesting.
Right? So with technology and everything like that, with software out there, you can go as detailed as you want. Pulling out an example, movie animation software. They're trying to model every hair, every imperfection of the face, every texture, to make it feel as real world as possible. For what we do, and we're trying to build a building, like that level of such realistic drawing and detail work on the digital side, that is not ever needed.
Yeah.
Right? And so with level of design, LOD, basically we're able to say, in a schematic design phase, take your drawings to this level of design. I'm not showing every nut, bolt, wire, knob, connection, every finish is perfect. It's not wanting to do that. So it's using technology, but digesting it in a digestible manner, where it's saying, even in construction documents, like we usually typically go to LOD 300 or LOD 400, which is still not saying every single decal, nut, bolt, caster, like every little detail of the component is modeled. Architects do the same thing too, right? So like they're making sure that their wall is a wall, but that wall has the components for BIM that they need, but not,
Doesn't need the wall texture.
Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't, right?
Oh,
so it's about determining, where do you need to be based on what you're trying to convey, right? It's about communicating the design. So if I'm going to put time and effort into modeling every single nut and bolt, is that needed? Will that help convey the design better or change, like the spec of the equipment or anything like that? Probably not. And so it's about understanding, and a lot of our architecture partners, we have this in our contracts too, and they understand the levels of design for BIM as well. It's about making it work for you. Again, it's a tool, not like a handicap. And so, you don't have to design things to be, rendered for a blockbuster movie. We're just trying to convey, here's your oven, this is how it's going to function and work.
And depending on the level of design, do you see a trend across the different markets that we work in? Because we work in all commercial markets.
Sure.
Do you see a trend across those markets, which ones need a little bit more of detailed designs, which don't?
I would say it's about even across the board. Most folks, our architecture partners, they usually trend to be about the same. Final documentation's about LOD 300, 400. Getting into LOD 500 typically isn't always needed. And again, they may be designing their stuff to LOD 400, but for kitchen designs, we may be just being hey, we just need to be LOD 300.
Gotcha.
Just to convey the design, the intent. And then, there's rendering companies and other visualization companies that probably can take that design and then they can apply a crazy level of graphics and detail to that. But our work is still sort of limited to about the LOD 200 to 400 range.
And that's
typical
consistent.
across the board.
Gotcha.
Very consistent.
Interesting.
Very consistent. Yeah.
So how do you typically leverage technology to create a more sustainable and environmentally friendly design? I think it's in construction, it's a conversation topic everywhere. I don't think you can really escape environmentally friendly designs these days, and I think it's for the better.
Sure.
And I think it's a great conversation to have, but how do you leverage technology to do that in your own work?
So I want to address basically what an efficient design is, or an environmentally friendly design, right? So when we're talking about sustainability from an energy use perspective, things like that, the technology that allows us to know as much as we can about every piece of equipment, I would say that's the technology piece that helps. And so basically, software that we have at our fingertips lets us research all the equipment that's on the market. We can see what's new, what's coming through. When we're talking about sustainability, whether it's water use, waste use, energy use, as an example, if we're doing an all-electric kitchen, we can have all of the all-electric cooking pieces of equipment at our disposal and our fingertips, right? So we can evaluate them to make sure that we're getting the most savings on electricity, which ones are Energy Star rated, all of that stuff. So that technology allows us to have really quick access to equipment and its information.
So more on like the research side.
The research side of it.
Interesting.
Right. And then we can take that, we can apply that to a design really easily, right? So say, yep, we're doing all electric, great. We found this piece of equipment that's going to work really well. Awesome, we're going to implement it. We get a sustainable design. We save a little bit of gas. Maybe we don't even have gas. Mm-hmm. So things like that. So that kind of is that side of things.
Interesting.
As far as creating a better design, which I would translate to, that is a more sustainable design just by being designed better. With the software itself, we're able to do multiple iterations. So, many, many years ago, when you had hand drawing and sketching and drafting, it was a lot of labor and time invested just to get to one design.
Yep.
Right?
Can imagine.
Oh, yeah, 100%. It would take forever. And so now, with today's world, it's not like a one or two design and done, and that's kind of accepted. It's an evolution of the design multiple times because it's, number one, it's easier. So you can make revisions faster, quicker. You can iterate things a little bit better. And so we can iterate a design to say, this matches your guys' labor model for an operator, right? And they're like, actually, we don't need this many pieces of equipment, for example, right? So we're like, okay, well, we can actually shrink our kitchen because we're able to iterate more often and not over-design a kitchen to be too big. So if we're able to really, have a conversation with the end user and the operator and be like, this is what y'all are doing, here's the equipment that's efficient, right? So equipment's come a long way as well. You can do 10, 20, 30, 100 different things in one piece of equipment now versus it being one use, right? So taking that side of things, applying that to maybe a bit smaller kitchen, they're trying to maybe, work with a smaller workforce, things like that. Sustainably, having a smaller footprint kitchen allows maybe the building to shrink or that space to be given to something else, and that other something else might be a revenue generating option or what have you, right? And then a smaller kitchen, maybe we need to have less air conditioning, right? So there's a lot of domino effects that might affect how all of this kind of comes together.
Interesting. In one of my past conversations, we talked about how kitchens just are becoming smaller and smaller
100%,
to create more revenue generating space. And I think your point to technology not only being able to streamline the process, but being able to iterate on it multiple times to make sure you get the best use of the space.
100%. Yeah, and engineers and architects alike, they will use the technology as well to make sure that, when you have a really large kitchen and you try to shrink it but still produce the same amount of food out of it, everything starts to come on top of each other, right? So you have ducts and pipes and, you have aisle spaces that you still have to make sure are correct and are clear and things like that. So the technology helps you coordinate with an architect or an engineer to say hey, this duct in my much smaller kitchen is actually going through a taller walk-in that I might have needed. So it's about using the technology to help coordinate some of those things that now we're doing, which is trying to, sometimes make a smaller kitchen, more efficient kitchen. But you still need all of the pieces and the parts that go into that kitchen.
Yeah.
So everything just gets
still
a
needs
bit
to
more
work.
Scrunched, right? So it's about using the technology to rearrange that kind of RAS nets of utilities and equipment and architecture and lighting and stuff like that to still make the design work.
Interesting. I have one final question for you that I ask all of the principals. And this is off topic, but why Ricca?
Sure.
And what does creating what's next mean to you?
Sure. So why Ricca? So Ricca again, and the creating what's next, those kind of go hand in hand for me. So I'm going to kind of answer this question on the topic that we've been talking about. So
I would expect nothing less.
Great. And so when I think Ricca, I think, when I came here many years ago, I came here because Ricca was at the forefront of using technology to make our lives better, as well for our end users, our clients, our partners. And so using some of my skill set, I'm able to take that and build upon that into creating what's next. And creating what's next for me, when I think of why Ricca, is the past is important. You got to learn from it. Use it as, an example. But don't let the past nor the future actually be the only determinant of what happens moving forward.
Interesting.
So with technology, again, using just an analogy or an example, TVs, right? Mm-hmm. So TVs is a really good example of, you see evolution of the technology of a TV every single year. And so you're like, okay, great. Well, I bought a TV last year. Do I need to buy a TV again this year? Maybe not. Your TV you had is probably still really good. It's still probably doing the same function.
Still probably thin enough.
And it's not broken yet.
Yep.
Right? So at the point where, you start to see, maybe 5 years from now, my TV might be outdated. And then the next one that I get, it's going to have all the new bells and whistles. It's going to be even thinner. So cell phones, TVs, kind of using that as sort of an analogy or a metaphor for kind of what we do. We embraced the technology side of things, Revit specifically, many, many years ago. We took that on, we fully invested in it, and we every single year improve upon it in some way. Looking towards the past, so we learned a lot last year, 10 years ago, on the design and things. Looking forward, there may be something that's really new and coming from AI or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. We're like, okay, well, that'll come here, maybe in 5 or 10 years. Right now, we're embracing kind of what is the thing that we can kind of, what's next for us in a digestible method. So in the next year or two, we're really looking into VR. That technology is really well developed. There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of investment in it. Mm-hmm. So we're like, great, that's something that we can research and, slowly implement into our workflow that says, yes, we're still embracing what's new, what's great, what's out there, in a slow, let's research it, let's get it worked into our, every day, mm-hmm. make sure it works, and then we'll, go on to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, creating what's next, I think I've talked about it with a lot of the other principles, but it's creating what's next in design and creating what's more efficient and better for the end user. But that thought, and on the kind of back end of it, on the behind the scenes of the mm-hmm. Ricca side, thinking about it in that way, I think it's different than anyone else I've had a conversation with before on that.
Especially just because we've been talking about technology a lot, and most folks, when you talk about technology, you don't want to notice technology, right?
That's a good point.
So if you have your cell phone and it breaks, that's typically when you start to really notice, oh my gosh, I need this all the time. I have my emails, my communications on this. What am I going to do without it? So when things are noticed, is usually when they go wrong. So technology is designed to just fit seamlessly into your life. And I think as Ricca, pushing the boundary of how does that technology make our lives in the background easier so that our end users and clients aren't focused on a meeting and they're like, oh, Ricca's just trying to figure out the software. It must be really hard software to figure
mm-hmm.
it out. No, we understand it, we know it, we can navigate it really quickly and really well to make our presentation for that client or that document for our client really seamless to understand and see. That's the true benefit of it. And I think that's what we do at Ricca. We think about, making that next leap into making technology work for us, but quietly.
I guess to kind of sum up what you're saying, from your perspective, creating what's next in the perspective of technology, it's simplifying and improving upon our communication styles and communication patterns in order to get the design across in a more effective way.
100%. Yeah.
And so being able to take on VR is what's going to allow us to become better communicators mm-hmm. and ultimately create what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting better at the software will make us come to our clients with a better design. It's more seamless. They don't have to worry about how did they figure this out? Our clients and end users don't want to know. They just want to see the pretty picture and the
That's
final
why
product.
That's why we're the consultants.
Right? Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to see the end result. They want to see the pretty open kitchen. We take it on to figure that stuff in the background so that end product is seen.
Awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today, Garrett.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.